I just did a story here on the lack of district attorneys across our 4 counties anyway. Here alone, their caseload this year went up like 67%.
Okay.
So, and I know what you're saying, I mean, crime has no party, it doesn't matter what it is, Republican or Democrat or anything. So our DA here in Northumberland County has 6 total people, but 4 work 33 and a half hours a week and 1 works 13. With that being said, do you think there is a shortage of that, or do you think that's like a county problem or a state problem where government should step in and help you guys?
Yeah.
Because again, if that's going here, you're getting referred to all of these counties, because I see you guys all over in our counties anyway. So that's taking away from things there, and you have to send people out to help these counties. So with that being said, all of, like I said, it's 67% increase in crime here, and they're violent crimes.
Yeah.
And we've just had, which will be the second part of this, we just had a horrific case here of a 3-year-old girl, which I'm sure you heard of, Arabella Parker, who was a victim of alleged child abuse.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's another separate issue that you guys are obviously working on to protect children as well.
Yeah.
But do you think there is a way for the district attorneys to get extra help and not necessarily rely on you? Because I know a lot of times when I talk to them, they're saying, we need to call the attorney general, we need to call them because you guys have to come in and help. So do you think there is ways to do that? And is the shortage just because of funding? And is that a beneficial thing for crime victims?
I think that's a really astute observation, and I'm going to answer this without speaking to any specific DA or specific case, because I think
it's a statewide thing.
Yeah,
Just here.
I just don't ever want them to think I'm kind of backseat driving them on this stuff. Few things. Number one, a district attorney can refer a case to me for 2 reasons. One, because they have a conflict, which whether you have a lot of resources or a little, the conflict is the conflict. But what we're seeing more and more of, which is what you're describing, is the second reason they can send me a case is when they do not have the resources. It's called a resource referral to prosecute it or investigate and prosecute a particular case. And we're seeing a lot more of those. It is, from a funding perspective, a county issue. County commissioners, and I was one, have to decide how much they want to invest in public safety and how much do they want to put into their district attorney's office or their public safety director's office or what have you. And I'm always a believer that you want to invest more. At some point, somebody's paying for this, right? Whether state taxpayers are because I'm sending my prosecutors here to do it, or whether the local DA is. And for a lot of these cases, candidly, they're better handled at the local level, right? We'll do it. I'm not complaining, but it would be better to have more investments at the local level. Now, county commissioners have a lot of burdens on them, demands on them. Obviously, taxpayers don't want to pay more in taxes, but my general view is that people are willing to pay a little bit more in taxes when it goes to one of 3 things: schools, infrastructure, and public safety. Particularly when county commissioners, mayors, others can go back to taxpayers and say, hey, I asked you for $50 more a year. I want to show you where that $50 went. It went to the DA's office. It went to this bridge. It went to this school. I think taxpayers generally, nobody wants to pay more, right? You don't. I don't. But if you see your investment not being wasted and going to those things, I think people tend to be okay with that. That's my general sense. So I'm not casting aspersions on any local DA or county commissioner, but that's my general view on the matter.
Does it hurt, crime victims being that short-staffed?
In general, my view is the more police, the more prosecutors, the more public safety officers you have in a community, the better equipped you are to deal with violence in your community. Ultimately, that's a decision that's going to be made by the local officials here.
We have time for 1 or 2 more guys.
Okay. We talked about, it's safe to say, I have a kid in middle school and a kid in elementary school.
Yeah.
And
So you're not sleeping much either.
Yeah. So, you talked about the top categories, that perhaps caught you a little bit off guard with cyberbullying and depression and things like that.
Yeah.
In our region, we've had, at least that we know, 6 student suicides within the last calendar year here, including one just around Thanksgiving time. The Danville Area School District just shortened their day by a half hour because they're saying 35% of their kids have expressed anxiety and depression type symptoms. Is there the numbers, the 41,000 tips that you've seen, is it too early to sort of quantify whether that is a success? I mean, I know you said it surprises you. I mean, can you sort of measure or sort of maybe give some examples of what came out of that, those 41,000 tips to sort of maybe reassure some people that this is working? And then
Sure.
additionally, with the 41,000 now we're a year into this, is there anything that you've learned from it that you need to change a little bit to sort of maybe get some additional information out of it?
Yeah, great question. So, tip comes in, it goes to our offices in Harrisburg. We're able to communicate via text back and forth to the student, or the parent for that matter. It tends to almost always be students. And then after we've gathered enough information on an instantaneous basis, we send that information out to one of two or both groups. One group is a predetermined set of school officials, typically a principal, counselor, or teacher, or whatever, who are predetermined, and then local law enforcement in that community, if there's a law enforcement angle to it. That happens almost immediately. So I would say to you now, reflecting on this over the last year, we could probably use some more funding to have more bodies doing this work, but the technology's working. Our specially trained agents are doing a great job, and I think that sort of back-end operational stuff is working really well. On the front end, what we're discovering, as I said to you before, is maybe not what we expected. And I think we need to have a serious mental health response in our schools. The fact that you've had that many suicides, it's 5 or 6, five in a rural community like this, speaks to a broader issue that exists in our society today. And I think it's incumbent upon policymakers to take this data. We have actual data now and use it to go and make smart investments. And I think the smartest investment they can make in a school right now is to have these public health counselors available to speak to students. And so that's why I've called for the state to invest that. I think local school districts need to invest that. Parents know that this is a matter they need to invest in, and I think it's really important. And, oftentimes in government, policymakers will make decisions based on their own ideology, based on their own feelings, based on their own anecdotal interactions with their constituents. And that's all fine. I'm not saying that's negative. But in this case, we have all of that plus real data that says from these students' mouths and fingertips what it is that they're concerned about. And we got to hear them. We got to listen to them, and we got to make those investments.
I have one more short, but
Sure.
before I get to my longer question, is there any?
So that's 2, John.
Yes, I have 2 questions, but one's short, one's longer. Governor's going to do his budget address next week. Do you have any indication that he's going to try to get you mental health funding?
I don't know. I think that's a question for the governor's office.
Okay. My longer question is, we've gotten suggestions, we've seen the early indications that gun rights groups in Pennsylvania are going to try to organize to try to get local counties and local communities past these Second Amendment sanctuary ordinances.
Mm-hmm.
We've obviously seen that happen all over Virginia. We saw what happened at the state capitol when the gun groups
Right.
showed up to kind of protest on behalf of themselves. What's your view as to whether or not there's any legal authority for local communities to describe themselves as Second Amendment sanctuaries?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think folks on all different sides of this discussion should be free to make their political statements. And sometimes they make their political statements in the form of a quote to your newspaper, and sometimes they pass non-binding resolutions and things like that. They should be free to do all that. Here's what we need to keep our eye on the ball on in law enforcement, and that is we have a legal responsibility to make sure we are keeping guns out of the hands of prohibited purchasers. And whether you are a supporter or someone who stands in opposition to the Second Amendment, we can all agree on that fact, that we need to keep guns out of the hands of criminals. I am a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. I defend it every day in my job. I'm also a strong believer that we need to prosecute people who are criminals who have guns. We just shut down a massive multi-state gun trafficking ring and took 36 crime guns off the streets between Pennsylvania and New Jersey. We just announced this, I think, 48 hours ago. I don't think that the idea that you can defend people's Second Amendment rights and also stand up and say we're going to keep guns out of the hands of criminals are mutually exclusive. I think we can do all of that together. So my view is local communities can engage in whatever politics they want. I'm focused on trying to keep people safe and defend their constitutional rights, and that's what we're doing.
But if we pass a red flag law and some sheriff someplace says, I think that's baloney and I'm not going to participate, what happens?
Well, I think then that's a question for local voters and the local community. If you are elevating people to positions of law enforcement leadership, a police chief, a sheriff, whatever, they have a responsibility to follow the law, and they have a responsibility to enforce the law.
But you would see it as the voters. You wouldn't take action against them. You would think they'd
Well,
protect the voters.
I mean, you're now in like a
That's-
three-step
yeah.
step hypothetical,
Yeah.
which I'm not going to engage in. What I'm saying is, I've got no problem with people expressing their political views and their ideological views, but one of the things we can all agree on is that guns should not be in the hands of criminals.
Real fast, I'm sure you heard that the UPMC hospital here has shut down. I know at the last, they had a kind of a town hall meeting with a bunch of employees and city officials, and the lieutenant governor himself made a statement that they urged to not lose this hospital. Is that something you've been following
Yeah.
as far as with the hospital?
We're dealing with this all across Pennsylvania, particularly in rural communities where these hospitals are being shut down. We actually are in bankruptcy court right now on another hospital in more the northwestern part of our state, where the hospital basically shut down, said they weren't going to pay their employees, said they weren't going to pay, other creditors, and we had to chase them down to bankruptcy court in Kentucky, where they filed to just get them to pay their employees and pay their bills. So we are continuing to work at this. There is, I think, a crisis brewing in rural Pennsylvania when it comes to healthcare delivery. That's an issue that is broader than just the legal responsibility I have in the AG's office. We've got to create an environment where these rural hospitals can survive fiscally and can continue to do good healthcare delivery and the jobs that exist in these communities as a result of it. This is a big deal. We focus a lot on Philly and Pittsburgh and some of the suburban counties outside Philly where there's just, the eds and meds are driving the economy. That's a good thing, right? But we're not paying as much attention, in terms of the news coverage and policy making to focus on these rural community hospitals that are in dire need of help. Again, I don't get a checkbook, so I don't get to write the checks to help them stay afloat, but I am doing everything in my legal power to keep them open and operational here in Sunbury and across the Commonwealth.
We need to wrap up, guys.
Yeah, we appreciate your time.
Thanks,
for
guys.
stopping by.